Welcome back to JA Global Marketplace, Session 6. Today's activity, you need the student workbooks, the table tents, the samples of currency, the certificates of achievement, and I want to point out that you do have puzzles in your curriculum kit, and these puzzles are for an optional activity that we are not going to have time to complete, so you can just disregard these puzzles. Today's activity is going to illustrate the importance of various currencies when working with other countries. So what you're going to do is, again, in your introduction, you're going to highlight and recap the things that you've learned in the previous sessions, and then you're going to jump into talking a little bit about different currencies that the students know about in different countries. One thing that is really great in this introduction is it challenges the students to think about why it's important to use a specific currency. For example, let's just pretend that they have neighbors from Turkey and they babysit or do some lawn mowing services for them, and they were to pay in the Turkish lira. Why would the students not want them to do it? Now, first, it might be kind of cool the first time or maybe the second time, but I can guarantee the students are going to lose interest very quickly because they can't go down to the local store and buy their favorite candy bar. So getting the students to think about the why behind the importance is often very beneficial. What the students are going to do is jump into an activity that shows about exchange rate. And once again, if you have ever traveled abroad or if you have specific examples, you can share those ideas with the students at this time. You can also ask the students to share examples if they've ever gone to a different country or if their parents have, and maybe some of the souvenirs that they have received and how they purchased those as well. If you have taught this activity and if you prompt them in Activity 5, you could even encourage them to bring in some of those souvenirs that they have collected from various travels that they may have had. For the exchange rate, you are going to notice that there is a sample exchange rate on page 18. One thing that I learned from a volunteer was a great way that he illustrated the point that the exchange rate changes daily is that he had collected newspapers from a course of a couple weeks, and he had given each group of students a different newspaper, and then he had them look up what the exchange rate was for a peso. Well, of course, one of them said one number and the next one said, nah, it's just a little bit different, and then the next one was like, no, wait, it was this, it's this, and he's like, you guys, I said to look at the peso. And so of course the students are frustrated because they're not agreeing, and that is the way he got them to see that that exchange rate changes on a daily basis. I thought that was a really great idea. So if you have the opportunity, you can collect it out of a newspaper that might have it, such as the Wall Street Journal, or on our website under the Program Resource Center found on jasd.org. We do have some currency exchange rates links that you can go ahead and just print different exchange rates for the day, the days leading up to your activity, or for a course of weeks as you teach the other activities. So that's just a little tip that you can use if you're interested. What you're going to do is, after you have them look a little bit at some of those exchange rates, you're going to pull them together and have them work into small groups. And so they're going to use page 18 of the student workbooks. And you can go through an example that's found on the top for them to be able to understand this. If you did use your own currency exchange rates that you either printed from the internet or you brought in from a newspaper, I would encourage the students to use what's on this page so that everybody is using the same information. So at this time, have them put those items aside and to focus just on their workbook. So what you'll notice is you want to go through an example on the board first. So for example, the toothbrush costs $2 American, and if they use the exchange rate on the bottom, which you're going to need to teach them how to look for and what to do, it's going to be 16.4 won or 90.4 rupee. The most important thing to do is to really get the students to realize that the exchange rate is not the same unit rate. So for example, the toothbrush doesn't cost $90.4, it costs 90.4 rupee. And a way I make that connection is I always talk about how 60 seconds equals 1 minute. So again, the unit is different. They equal the same thing, but the 60 seconds is obviously the same thing as 1 minute, even though that number is different due to the unit. So what I like to do is I like to assign each group one of the different countries. So I tell them that they're going to go on a trip, and this group is going to be going to Sweden, that group is going to be going to Kuwait, Mexico, and the EU. And obviously you're going to be short some groups, so if you want to, if you have typically 6 groups, you can have the last 2 groups choose a country that's not yet written, or they could double up as well. A lot of times they really enjoy choosing their own because they'll usually pick the ones that are most dramatic, such as South Korea or Indonesia. What I like to have them do is just focus on one country. That way it expedites the process of doing the math with their calculators. And while they're working individually, I always write a big grid on the board, and I ask one representative from each group to come up and put the numbers on the board. That way the students can go ahead and fill in the graph for the remainder of the countries. This just gives them a little opportunity to talk through and kind of really see how they need to be mindful of different currencies as they go to different countries. The second portion of the activity, after you look at the exchange rate, is to consider whether or not the countries with NAFTA, Canada, the United States, and Mexico, if we should come up with a common currency. And of course, one of the common currencies that we can think of is the euro that they use over in Europe. One thing I always do is I get the students to think about, and I use the palm of my hand because I have a fairly small hand, and I always show them the size of Europe is very, very similar to the size of the United States. And so with that, I get them to think about, what if in the United States every single state had a different currency that is very similar to the countries found in Europe? And so I tell them, especially in South Dakota, we have lots of borders all around us. So for example, if you're on the southeast side of the state, all of a sudden within an hour you can be in Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota. And so what if every time you went across the border you had to do an exchange rate? That would get to be very cumbersome. And that's really some of the motives behind why the euro was invented. So I take a little bit of time to talk about that. Then I transition by talking about, what about Canada, America, and Mexico? What do we think of? In South Dakota, how much would that really impact us? We're in the center of the United States. We don't really get to Mexico and Canada without a really specific purpose. But what about the states that are bordering Mexico or the states that are bordering Canada? I really get them to think about those different options. Again, the importance of perspective from different viewpoints. What the students are going to get to do is to work in small groups, and they get to work out of their workbook. They get to consider different questions regarding if we were to come up with a common currency, and then we actually challenge them to come up with a design. What would that design be? Again, this connects back to that third activity with franchises and culture and the importance of culture. So we're not going to want to give up ours. Canada's not going to want to give up their maple leaf. Mexico's not going to want to give up their culture. So how are we going to find a common ground? So again, the students can work in small groups, and then you can share, have them share at the end to the whole group some of their ideas. A couple fun things I've heard other volunteers do. Some of them hold this as a class debate. So instead of having them work in small groups, they present it to the whole class and have the people who think we should and the people who think we shouldn't to go either side of the room and then to talk about it. Again, keep it friendly. And I have other volunteers that challenge the students to think about, what would the name of that currency be? And sometimes the students can get very, very creative as to how they would blend those three cultures into a name of the currency. At the end, because this is the final activity, we want to make sure that you take the last 5 minutes or so to do a graduation with the students. We do have certificates of achievement that we encourage you to fill out. What you'll notice is that on our website at jasd.org, there is a template that you can actually type the information in and print the certificates instead of handwriting them. What we encourage you to do is to talk to the students about the time that you've been with them and how much you've enjoyed them. Try to find a few specific things that you can praise the students about, and talk about their future and how successful they're going to be. They're going to get scholarships, they're going to get athletic awards, and ultimately someday they're going to be walking across that high school stage to receive their diploma. So it's always a fun way to have the students come up and role play what a good proper handshake looks like. I always talk about not being a dead limp fish and not being a super squeezer. I always talk about like not ripping my arm off but not being just really weak either. I demonstrate a good handshake And then I actually have the students come up and receive the award. I always talk to them about how you receive the award over. You shake with your right hand, receive with your left hand, you look me in the eye, I say congratulations, you say thank you, and then they move forward. So we really encourage you to do some sort of graduation. A lot of volunteers like to bring a special treat in, whether it be a logoed item from your company, like a pencil or a pen, or possibly candy. Again, a reminder, if you do choose to bring an edible treat, make sure you run it by the classroom teacher and ensure there's no peanut allergies, so avoid all peanut candy. Enjoy this final session.